Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to the Free Rotation podcast. This is Becky, and I'm with Christopher.
Hello.
I don't know why he sounds like a goblin. Angela.
Hello.
And I'm only introducing this episode because Angie hates introducing episodes. So take it away, Angie.
Oh, I'm not ready.
As you're drinking a sip of water. Surprise.
Did that on
You
purpose.
still weren't ready.
Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another phenomenal episode with your favorite hosts.
Not us. It's probably some other podcast.
It's not even phenomenal.
This is another fun.
We're sorry that you thought you loaded something
I
else.
was going to say another whelming episode of information and facts.
Because, hey, guess what? In Atlanta, we had an even scarier version of Jack the Ripper.
You know what's sad is that I didn't know about this until we went to like Oakland Cemetery and there was a book called The Atlanta Ripper. And we're like,
And I'm like, well, I need that. It's heinous crime.
right. And you know what we're known for in this podcast? True crime. It's a true crime podcast.
And being idiots.
I noticed you haven't said anything, Chris.
No, every time you say Atlanta Ripper, I think of Chip the Ripper and his freestyle with Interior Crocodile.
Oh, God.
The Chevrolet movie theater. If you haven't heard it, go to YouTube. It's just classic.
Once again, this is why we are the dumbasses.
No, that was knowledge imparting. I didn't know about that until Chris said it.
Speaking of brain damaged.
Well, I saw the Jack the Ripper, the Atlanta Jack the Ripper referred to as Black Jack the Ripper. Now I can't stop thinking about that.
Blackjack gum tastes like licorice. It's delicious.
I love it.
Yeah.
Turns your mouth black, too.
You can only get it at like Cracker Barrel anymore.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Well, in your mouth will look like your teeth have rotted out entirely.
So like meth.
I saw a funny TikTok. It was talking about how, they say white people can't cook. She was like, yes, we can. We cook meth all the time.
Yeah. We could
We're the reason you can't get Sudafed at the store.
You're welcome.
But no, Blackjack the Ripper.
Anyways, so I mean, there's just some things that you think after you've lived in a city for, I don't know, your entire life, you would know stuff about. And then it turns out you don't. And then we decided to do research on it. And it makes a lot of sense why people don't know about it. It's one of those things that kind of got lost into history.
Yeah.
And by live in the city, she means sort of near it.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's like we live within the perimeter of it. And I think all three of us could probably state mad facts about Atlanta if we were to be asked about it.
Speaking of which, let's state some mad facts about Atlanta.
Go.
Yeah.
What facts would you like?
Well, let's talk about how it was born. It was the terminus of two railroads.
That's why it was called Terminus originally.
Yeah.
That's why it also is one of the biggest it's actually still one of the biggest cities to have any sort of railroad or railway transportation through it, and airport. That's also another thing.
And it's also, in 1843, it was renamed Marthasville for General Lumpkin's daughter, Martha Lumpkin, who is buried in Oakland Cemetery.
And it's like the 7th capital of Georgia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Georgia could not decide its capital for a long time. It's like its weather.
Right. And then in 1845, it was renamed Atlanta, which is the feminine version of Atlantic after the railway. Mm-hmm. I always hoped it was after Atalanta from Greece, but no.
No.
No, everything's industrial here. It was the industrial hub of the South.
Yeah, a lot of people, I think that, like, when you think Georgia, you think a lot more cotton plantation, and that is true for more surrounding areas.
Especially when you get when you get towards Macon.
Yeah, when you get toward Macon. But if you look at the Piedmont area, which is where Atlanta kind of lies, Atlanta was very much an industrial city. It was highly versatile in mercantilism.
Right, textilism.
Yeah, so, and it actually did not have as many slaves as people would have assumed. It was more so...
That's right. It was more so a free state, not a free state, but a free city in the slave state.
Right.
And you have to imagine, people don't think about it, but the Appalachians start basically a little bit west of Atlanta and go through there. So that land is not necessarily hospitable for growing farms. And it's just not. Like, rocks suck.
Yeah.
So, like, once you get south of there, you start seeing the farms crop up and the plantations. But you don't hear about a lot of plantations, especially, like, north of Atlanta.
No.
Because there's mountains.
No, it's mostly orchards.
Yeah.
Like, this
trees.
is where you're getting into your pecan trees, your apple tree. Yeah, it's just orchards.
And even though, like, Sherman's march to the sea was devastating to Atlanta, the big thing about it wasn't the plantations or anything like that. It was the fact that the railways were bringing ammunition and any sort of
food.
The Atlanta Arsenal
the
supplied
South.
the entire Confederate Army. Actually, Sherman said that Atlanta was the biggest impact to the northern... I almost called it northern aggression. I'm from the South,
Well,
y'all.
People,
say, are
people
you the-
call it the War of
I was
Northern
about to
Aggression.
say, are
here.
you the sisters of the Confederate soldiers or some shit? What
Listen,
the hell?
reading this very Southern-sided book. Okay. And the War of Northern Aggression.
And what book did you read, Angie? Just to
I
cite
read
it.
The Atlanta Ripper, the unsolved case of the Gate City's most infamous murders by Jeffrey Wells.
I read Google.
But yeah, so Sherman said that with the Atlanta Arsenal here, and there was a munitions building that supplied the entire Confederate Army, that Atlanta, even though not directly involved in the war, was like the biggest contribution to why the Confederacy was doing so badly.
Right.
So that's why on his march through Georgia, because, Grant told Sherman, just go through Georgia and just level it. Just ruin the Confederacy by destroying Georgia. So he did. They occupied Atlanta, and as they left, everybody hears about the burning of Atlanta. Grant had told Sherman, destroy it. Sherman told his troops, level the buildings, the industrial buildings, and then set them on fire. That way the fire wouldn't spread. But in their aggression, they set fire to the buildings before leveling them, and that's how the fire spread and burned the city.
Mm-hmm.
So they had set fire to the buildings and everything. It wasn't really intentionally a war decision, but the soldiers were very angry, set fire to the city of Atlanta, and then, he continued marching to the sea. After the war, Atlanta had $1.50 in its treasuries, and that was all Confederate money, so we were broke.
Yeah.
But we were the quickest to recover, and we didn't need the carpetbaggers.
No, it's because, and that's basically attributed to the fact that we were a mercantile city. We
Right.
ended up just switching out. And,
Same thing, just kept the cotton.
well, and the thing was, we weren't reliant on slavery, cotton, any of those agricultural.
That's exactly
it. was
it.
sharecroppers that
That's
were important
right.
for us.
And it was laborers, like your African American community was already getting paid. There was already a very solid African American leadership that worked well with the white leadership. Matter of fact, there was really no separation. We had W.E.B. Du Bois here.
Yeah. I mean, here's some. I'm gonna spit some mad facts at you real fast.
Spit 'em.
So in 1860, there was only 9,000 people in Atlanta. By 1865, there was 22,000 people, and by 1900, there was 90,000 people, with 35,000 of them being African American.
Mm-hmm.
So Georgia, I think Atlanta was considered one of the highest growing
Integrated.
populations
Right.
in the South, and it was because there was no reliance on the agriculture that the Confederacy had been based on prior to the Civil War.
And then right after the turn of the century, you had a gubernatorial race. And the two main candidates both owned newspapers. I think it was the Atlanta Journal and the Atlanta Constitution. The two owners were running against each other. So you had a lot of sensationalized crime stories. White women attacked by black men. Basically demonizing black men, vilifying them. And the two in their newspapers were talking like, the guy who ended up won, Hoke Smith, was that the same?
Yeah. What a name.
Yeah. He was like, we need to disenfranchise black voters. It's the only way we're going to get the white community, on a solid ground again. And then the other guy who lost, I don't remember his name because he lost, it should have been better.
Welcome to history.
Yeah. He was like, no. With the fees you have to pay to vote, black people can't afford it anyway, so we're fine. And then Hoke Smith was like, oh, he's not taking a hard enough stance. And it literally set white people against black people. Then what do we get?
The 1906 race riot.
Riot is also a loose term.
Yeah.
We're going to throw that out
So we
there.
actually were talking about this prior to the podcast. And that, the race riot, you would designate that it's two races going against each other. It was definitely not.
It was
No.
mostly just white people lynching black folk in Atlanta.
And it's true.
Yeah. Just, there were these, like I said, sensationalized crime stories. And then in one day they said, 4 white women attacked by gangs of black men. So the white men were like, oh, we're not taking this shit.
But again, and I know it sounds crazy, but if you were alive back then, basically the newspaper is the only way you heard anything.
That's right.
And you assumed they were telling you the truth.
Yeah.
So again, it sounds crazy, but our communities were very separate. Black communities and white communities did not intermingle. So if you heard that gangs of black people were attacking and killing white people in the streets of Atlanta, you'd probably believe it.
believed it.
Right.
And be terrified for
Yeah.
your mom, your wife, your sister, and be like, I can't let this happen.
Right, and I mean, you made a great point. The only information you're getting is from newspapers back then. You're not
and
getting...
these people are lying.
Right, and I mean, I mean, I hate to say this, but you're not integrated enough to the other side to be like, oh, they're all just full of bullshit. Like,
Yeah.
you're just assuming that these things are happening because, hey, somebody in a newspaper said this. And it's like propaganda all the which way. It's the same thing that happened with Lake Lanier where they flooded the city that used to be under Lake Lanier. A lot of that was a lot of...
exactly it.
racial discord that led to the white people being like, y'all gotta go, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
But like, and again, I'm not saying these people were justified in what they were doing, but I am saying if you look at it a little bit from their side, that most of them probably didn't know any better.
Yeah.
They really assumed that these gangs of roaming black monsters were attacking people when it probably never happened. Like,
Right.
realistically, again, if you were a black guy living, and even with the stats, a little over a third of the population of Atlanta back then was black, you're not going to be in gangs attacking white people.
No.
That's the dumbest shit in the world.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we had the race riots in Atlanta where a lot of white guys got together and lynched like 210?
Oh, yeah, it was a lot of people.
It's like 210 black guys, I think.
And the thing is, like, this...
Yeah, it was an excessive amount.
And I was going to say, what we...
Presumed crimes.
Exactly.
Not even, they just assumed that these guys were doing things.
Well, and it's sort of similar to a lot of craziness that happens. And, we talked about the Atlanta child murders. And it never fails that there's always a culmination of some kind of racial tension or some kind of tension that's occurring prior to these, like, slew of serial murders that kind of skew what happens. And whether it's reported, if it's underreported, if it's investigated fully. And it's one of those things, again, where you can kind of see where his history repeats itself, especially if we had really done it the correct way, if we had started with the Atlanta Ripper, we could have seen a lot of similarities with the Atlanta child murders. And the only difference was there was, 60 years between the two? Yeah.
Right. And you think, like, man, in 60 years,
70.
we should have 70 years, we should have really seen, a difference in how the police approached it, but we saw the exact same attitude. It's black neighborhood. It's their problem.
Well, do we want to talk about it?
Yes, so there's an argument that it started in 1909, and then some people say it started in 1911.
I think the official date they say is 1911, but the first murder that could be attributed to the Atlanta Ripper was
and the reason that they
1909.
say it might not be the same is because the first series of murders were committed with gun. Mm-hmm. Although we did see that in what's termed the Atlanta Ripper murders. But when you hear Ripper, what do you think?
You get stabbed. You get slashed and
you get
stabbed
slashed.
and hit and
Body
did
parts cut out, which is exactly what the Ripper murders were.
Right.
Eventually.
Eventually.
Not starting off.
No.
No, and that's why it took them a while to make the connection that, hey, this is a serial killer, especially since it was happening in a black community. You didn't get a lot of attention to it until white people were affected.
Right.
And they weren't murdered, they were just robbed.
And they never even attributed it to a serial killer throughout the whole investigation. That comes after all this is said and done.
After all of it.
And a lot of it, the Atlanta Ripper is actually, I think, termed outside of, I think it's like the New York Times that terms it or something to that effect. But that's because if you look in the context of time in which, and I will probably talk about that, the context of time in which these are happening, this is literally 20 years after Jack the Ripper is gone on his, like, whole rampage in England. So there is...
that was 1888?
1880... Yes, 1888. And so there's still a lot of, like, closeness to those proximity. And you have to remember, a lot of people have family from Europe that's still in this area. And you just sort of know, like, the story of Jack the Ripper. And then when you have murders that are very, very similar to what's happening in England, there's a lot of attributing to it. However, there's a lot of differences as well.
And looking at it now, you can see, like, similarities, from looking at it from our perspective, knowing what we know about how a serial killer's mind works. You look back and you're like, targeted young, mulatto, and octoroons. Very few were, octoroons.
Is that the proper term?
Yeah.
Sounds racist. I'm sorry.
It really is.
I just can't.
It means that one of your great-grandparents was...
No, I get the idea behind it. I'm just saying that sounds like probably one of those terms.
Well, if you're looking at it contextually at the time in which, so we're like, nobody says mulatto anymore, but this is what was used in the time period, so it's more mixed race.
There's a different word they used in the time period, and it definitely wasn't an octoroon or mulatto.
We're being very scientific,
BT dub,
politically correct. For
throw this out there.
Period. Oh my god! No,
I'm just saying, if we're gonna use the terms,
that's true.
But no, octoroon sounds way more racist than That's a bad one.
Then an eighth black.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, this is me on a tangent. If you have to judge which is worse, retard or octoroon, I'm going to go octoroon by a landslide because that sounds awful.
Yeah.
How is that not banned from popular language?
Yeah. I'm just saying what the history book.
No,
said.
I understand. It's just
yeah.
in my brain. I'm like,
No,
octoroon.
I know.
2023, we would say it's mixed race, but if we're talking about the context in which this was happening,
because you are literally identifying a person by their blood content. Oh, she's got an eighth black and everything.
Well, I wonder, like, and this is just me again, like, mulatto's not acceptable anymore.
Yeah.
But, like, mestizo was, like, I think Mexican and black. Mm-hmm. Is that still, like, the proper term? Like, I've never heard anybody be pissed off about being called a mestizo.
If you're about to get pissed off at us, just leave us alone, dude.
No, I'm genuinely curious because
Yeah.
how the hell is octoroon not banned?
Octoroon honestly sounds like some wizarding term you find in D&D where you're about to, like, summon, like, 8 different things.
And in the New York, the news stories, I don't know where I got New York from news stories.
Negro. That's the term that, like, the New York Times is Negro.
Negro and Negress.
Yeah.
Yeah. But in the news stories at the time, when it was like a full-blooded black person, they'd say Negro or Negress. And there was one where they were talking about a young mulatto female, and they were like a very dark-skinned mulatto.
Would quadroon be a term?
Quadroon is a term.
Oh, no.
No, seriously,
How did you learn your shapes? Very racially.
Yeah. Is that a non-droon? I know who that is.
Have you heard of the what is it? A septagon? What is the 7?
Septagon.
Septagon. Have you heard of the septaroon?
You can't have a septaroon. You have to have two people to make a baby.
I also think it doesn't make any sense to have any.
What if they were a thruple? Racist?
Yeah, how do you
How dare
know?
you kink
Be
shame?
a
Wow.
sextroon.
This is 2023. You can be whatever you like to be.
Thank you.
Quadroon.
That's just not how doubling works, though. It's like 2 to 4 to 8 to 16.
What's 16 then?
32.
No. What would 16 be?
I don't know.
16th
A 16th-aroon.
Dosectaroon?
Yeah. Doseki.
Dos
Sounds fair than man.
No, I'm just saying, again, this is just me. Quadroon and octoroon sound awful.
Yeah.
And I say awful shit, but I'm not calling nobody a quadroon. I don't give a fuck.
All right, so we're just going to designate this as they were mixed race. I'll just leave it at that. They were mixed race.
Like, Becky's a half-Daroon for Veronian.
I don't think you can call her a rune anything.
I'm like, half a Durka is more than the correct terminology if you're going to say it.
A
Please remember
Quadurka.
Quadurka.
And an Octadurka.
Sand rune? Is that
Yeah.
the
I think that was just
Did you
out
fit
of, like,
camel in
Prince of
that
Persia.
order?
What are you talking about?
I don't know.
I had to find a sand rune. Anyway.
But yes, you can see even the news articles at the time, you know, they really relegated, you know, African-American community to just sub
Subhuman,
people.
Yes.
Yeah. You know, and later on we'll get into how, you know, you had to have the white community step in on behalf of the black leaders who, by the way, more educated, more well-read, more well-traveled than anybody in Atlanta at the time.
You say that, but then the black leaders started blaming the black community for their sins and saying it was their fault.
Oh, yeah, he
Yeah.
did.
That's what started, even the leaders of the church all started doing that in their own communities. And you're like, what the fuck is going on?
Yeah.
He did, what was his name, was Henry Hugh Proctor.
Yeah, Proctor.
And then he was like, it's our fault in the black community. You know, we drink, we sin. These women were of loose morals.
Yeah.
And they weren't. They were service women. And when we're not talking about, like,
Yeah.
prostitutes. Like,
No.
Some of them were
Cooks, maids.
sleeping outside of marriage with men, okay?
Yeah,
Yeah, that happens everywhere.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
they weren't straight up prostitutes. They were
Yeah,
actually.
but these were
like,
cooks on their way to their
Yeah.
jobs.
Yeah.
Or on their way home.
Yeah.
Being dragged into an alley.
I got off a shift.
And speaking of Quadra, this happened in the 4th Ward. So if you're not familiar with Atlanta,
Sweet Otter.
I was about to say,
Yeah.
a lot of that area, but a lot of people don't realize if you're not from Atlanta, Atlanta is designated, you would think it's a small city. It is not. It is a very big city.
It's just spread out.
It's just very spread out. But the 4th Ward is actually kind of like your boroughs in New York. It's one of the areas in Atlanta that if you're talking about where you're going, you talk about the 4th. It's called the old 4th Ward now, but that's basically where a lot of these killings were attributed to.
And again, back then it was a lot of working class African American people, and now it's a bunch of hippie white folk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It has been overtaken.
Like that little
Yeah.
5 points in Old Fourth Ward.
Oh my god!
Do you really need a more weird
Yeah.
existential crisis paintings?
If you want to buy a $1 million house that has a leaky roof and 2 bedrooms, the Old Fourth Ward is for you.
Go to Fourth Ward. If you want just slightly above that, hit up Little 5. I used to want to live there, and I'm like, why?
No.
No
I think
parking,
it's like an
no
age
anything.
thing when you're in your 20s. You're like, this is where I want to
Yeah.
be.
Ooh,
And
This
then
is
you
where
hit your 30s,
you
you're
think
like, oh.
everything's happening there, and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, nothing good happens
Yeah.
here.
I want to be where the
And it's
hipsters
called
are.
creme. There's a lot of creme here.
Creme de la creme.
There's a lot of heroin addicts on these streets wandering
This
about
is
at night.
interesting.
It smells vaguely of weed at all times.
And urine. Let's
True.
not forget the
Yeah,
urine, because
yeah.
they
Yeah.
just pee.
Yeah. You can just go buy an edible. It's legal. Whatever.
Yeah.
Mushrooms for sale on the streets.
Yeah.
from
Speaking
vendors.
of Sweet Auburn, one of the very first murder victims was found just tossed in a garbage heap, shot in the head. So that's where we can really pinpoint the first murder, even though it's not really attributed to the Atlanta Ripper. Some people say it is. Like this is the escalation we see by people or peoples.
Or like a test to see what happens if you do kill a person.
Well, we know violence escalates.
Right.
And again, well, the thing is, like, I don't... And there's no way to tell if these were or weren't him. But typically you don't go from gun to knife. It's usually the other way.
Right.
Other way, yeah.
Usually you don't revert back to a different,
Yeah.
more sloppy way. And again, the policing back then, they didn't really investigate murders in the African American community. They
No.
didn't really give a shit.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, I'll be
No,
honest, they
if
didn't
it
care.
made the papers, it was a tiny like, heinously murder thrown in the trash.
And it had to have been someone
And
that
on
was
to our
either
more important news.
affluent African American
Right.
or affected white people somehow.
Right.
Yeah.
And the thing,
Otherwise, they didn't give a shit.
well, and like I said, like it's like history repeating itself. It's very similar to the Atlanta child murders, where it was very underreported until
Right.
somebody had to step in, mostly white people, who had to step in and say, "This is something that's actually happening that we need to take some sort of consideration for," because people are dying. Like this is the amount of people who died during this time period, which you can either attribute to or not attribute to the Atlanta Ripper. It's a lot.
It's insane. You might be thinking we're talking about 8 or 9, 10 people. No, we're talking like 40, like guarantee. What do they verify? Like
They
24?
verified 24, and they said up because they said that the time period that this runs between
And
is,
it kept going
well-
after they said it was done.
well, I think the official time period they call it is between 1911 and 1914, unless you want to add 1909.
but it goes up.
But it could go up for another 10 years, which
Into the
attributes
20s.
up to like the 40.
Right, because there would
people.
be another similar crime, throat slit,
Somewhere along
body
the way.
cut up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And the problem is, like, even with the reporting, like, the numbers, like, when I was researching this, it was at least 15 are attributed to him and up to 28. So
Yeah.
we don't even know the actual,
Yeah.
like, there's just no way
Well,
to
it's
tell.
all a
Right.
guesstimation
Because they
by
didn't
what you
report it
listen
at the
to.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They gave very few details,
The
unless
details you can read are, they're, even amongst the papers themselves that are reporting it, are conflicting.
Well, and if we talk about 1911 being the initial like time period, but that's really when it was starting to be reported as a
Right.
serial killer. In 1910, I think it was attributed that there was at least one black woman murdered a month. That they
Yeah.
said had these similarities of the Atlanta Ripper murders.
at
But
least one a month.
at least
Yeah.
one a month. And the problem was it wasn't until 1911 that it actually started being reported that these were happening.
And it's because another just random crime happened, and it was this man killed his wife. He, slit her throat, almost cut her head off. And, like, the neighbors all saw it because her head was hanging on by literally just a flap of skin. The police came out, and then someone called the police station and was like, hey, one of your officers was just murdered by this group of black men, in the black neighborhood. So 100 men, like, white people get together, over 100 people come down. Oh, they killed one of our cops. We're going to get them. No, he shows up from his patrol and was like, I didn't die.
Was it murdered?
Please stop killing people in that community. I mean, I don't think there was any violence, racial violence at the time. I think it was stopped in time. But it made front pages because of the story.
Sensationalism.
Yeah. But it kind of brought the Atlanta Journal's attention to that black community. Because I guess maybe one of the reporters was out there, maybe overheard somebody. This is what I imagine. Like, well, this isn't the first time,
yeah.
Doesn't make,
Well, there was this underlying idea that black men were inherently violent
Right.
towards anybody for any reason. And there was a judge at the time in Atlanta that said there are 1,000 black men right now that are ready to cut their wife's head off at any kind of infraction. So clearly this isn't a serial killer. This is a problem amongst the
Right.
black community. And it's like, dude, that's not helping anybody.
No.
Yeah.
Shut the fuck up.
Right.
Well, there was a lot of consistencies that I think in the latter time when they started calling it the Atlanta Ripper murders that they attributed it. So it was like a lot of times what would happen with these women is their heads would be bashed in, their throats would be slit, they would be dragged to wherever they were found, and then their shoes were removed. And pretty much consistently, all of these murders happened on a Saturday night.
Right. Not everybody lost their shoes. Like one lady lost like a fingertip.
Right.
Some lady was missing half her boob.
Not
Well, that
all
was
of them,
sort of the latter end.
yeah, and not all of them had their heads cracked.
And
Right.
the shoes were missing towards the latter
Right.
end too. Like at the beginning, you know, and not all of them were just viciously cut up. Some of them just had a throat slit. But almost all of them were bashed in the head first.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they don't know first because they didn't have the forensics at the
Yeah.
time.
So, well, some of them, and again, some of them didn't have their head bashed at all. Some of them, they said it looked like he walked up behind them and just cut their throat and just walked away.
Yeah.
And it's like, what? Who's policing this?
Yeah, and then so, like you said, the more heinous ones were dragged off. They were bashed in the head, and then you could see they saw the drag marks. And then so you had the black community like, hey, can you please like help
black
us
people were
here?
scared to go out at night. Like,
Yeah,
not only because of the fear of murder, but they were also, there was not, the cops had put like an official curfew on black people at night. Like, you weren't allowed to go out because you might get murdered. So they were scared they were going to get arrested. On top of the fact that the cops had just started arresting people that they thought might be associated
Yeah.
with no
Right.
no rhyme or reason. Just
Yeah.
like, you're coming with me.
yeah, because there was one lady who escaped, one girl,
Daughter.
Her
Yeah.
name was Emma Lou Sharp.
right? And she was like, you know, he was tall, skinny, with broad shoulders, and wore a black hat.
And she designated that he was a black man. But what this is actually a really sad story if you've ever heard of it. Actually, what happened is her mother, Lena Sharp, was a victim of the Atlanta Ripper. And now what had happened is that Alina Sharp had actually gone out and went to the market. And had not returned. So Emma Lou was like,
Let me go check
it
out
was
my
a
mom.
little weird because,
Right.
you know, she should have been back by now. And at this point, there's a lot of reports about the Atlanta Ripper happening. So she goes out and she comes into contact with this guy that she describes like Angie does. And he's like trying to get her attention, all this different stuff.
Something like, hey, how you getting along tonight?
Yeah, you whistling
and then
at
boom,
her.
stabbed her in the back.
Yeah, and she says that the last thing she remembers him saying is, "I never hurt girls like you," and then
He stabbed
bashed
her
in
in
the
And
head
then
and stabbed her.
he
Yeah.
stabbed her in the back. Yeah, and here's the odd thing about this. Oh, I know. I wanted to explain that here, and I'm not sure if this is the same it is everywhere, but we have a lot of night markets here. So
Yeah.
she was going to a night market. It's not uncommon here.
Yeah.
Matter of fact, we're going to one this coming Friday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it was, she ended up surviving, but of course her mother did not. But both of them were technically victims of the Atlanta Ripper. And I think I think there may have been one other woman who had survived what they thought may have been the Atlanta Ripper, but she was the one who actually survived an attack and was able to identify somebody who may have been one
Right.
of the,
Yeah.
who could have been the Atlanta Ripper.
And at
By
this
his
time,
voice.
the Atlanta Constitution finally got on the bandwagon. It was like, oh my God, I think these murders are connected.
Well, I wonder, and the Atlanta Constitution got involved after the New York Times.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they didn't see the popularity the story had in the New York Times. Like, well,
And then wanted to make money
we
off
definitely
of it.
need to report this. It's happening here.
Yeah, and because their biggest concern at the time were the series of break-ins in the white neighborhood attribulated.
Attribulated.
You would actually see like pictures of this if you go, Google online. You can look at old news articles, and you would see like in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, like these long articles about these break-ins by black men and blah 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 in the white neighborhoods, and then suddenly there's a little sliver talking about people getting their heads bashed in and their throats slit.
Yeah, like, oh my God, this should be bigger news.
Like if it
This is
happened now,
insane.
can you imagine how much shit would be reported on this?
Oh my God, it'd be on the 24 news.
It
be on
would be.
TikTok.
But then they thought black on black crime.
They didn't
Who
care.
cares?
Well, and that's also part of it is because when they figured out that it could be possibly attributed to a black man, it was kind of relegated to like, oh, it's black men being black men.
Well, the black leaders get together and they go to the Atlanta City of Commerce Chamber.
Atlanta Chamber of Commerce.
Atlanta City. Okay.
The
City
City
of
of
Atlanta
Atlanta's Chamber of Commerce.
Thank you.
High five.
We got there. It only took 11 of us. That's my other personalities. And
I was
you
about
took
to say.
And the Chamber of Commerce were like, you know what?
What is happening?
I don't know, just listening.
Okay.
What is that noise you're making? It sounds like the Ripper. That's what I envision the Ripper sounds like as he creeps out of the dark.
He's a big black guy. That's definitely not what he sounds
I
like.
don't know.
All right, go ahead.
Okay. So the Chamber of Commerce, they go to the mayor and the governor, and they're like, hey, we need to... That's what the throat sounds like when it's being cut.
I'm
for
not making any
sure.
noise. What are we
You
doing?
are. You're doing weird things with your mouth. Stay away from your microphone.
And so they go to the mayor and the governor. What?
I don't even know anymore.
So the black leaders
Stop
go to
making eye
the
contact with
City
him.
of Atlanta Chamber of Commerce. Gotta get Chris out of my view. Oh, he gets his double chin now. And if they ask for help, they're like, hey, can we at least offer a reward? Can we, get the police, more of a police force? Because the Atlanta police force was also very small.
Yeah.
And remember, they've got their priorities with the white burglaries. They can't take time in the black murders. And so Governor Wynn was like, Mayor Wynn was like, yeah, let me ask the governor because I can't give money, I can't allocate money for, reward money. But he could. He just, black.
You're just being a butthole.
So they go to the governor and they actually issue this statement that says, this is an upstanding, group of the community that's being treated as subpar. That's essentially what it said. Like, you need to respect them because they do contribute to the industrialism of Atlanta, and there are community members. So it was also one of the first times the white community took up for the black community, like in this area of time. A lot of people say it's because it was affecting their pocket, because these women didn't want to go to work.
Yeah.
And this was before child labor law, so there's also,
You got to remember, too, if you're a white upper-class person in Atlanta, you probably have black servants, black maids, black housekeepers, black au pairs, whatever.
Yeah.
And if they stop showing up, you're expected to clean by your husband
Yeah.
if you're the lady of the house, and that shit ain't gonna
Exactly.
fly.
You got to make your own chocolate pies.
But there was also this weird... Amongst the policemen, there was a weird idea that the black community knew who this was and would not tell them for whatever reason.
Yeah.
So they also didn't want to put forth the effort because they figured they really did believe that the black community could handle this themselves if they wanted to. They just chose not to. They decided
Because they were scared of...
Yeah, whoever it was. And they just wouldn't tell the cops who
Which
it
in the
was.
youth murders, we did see that a lot of people were afraid to come forward or trust the police because of the brutality suffered at the hands of them.
That makes sense.
Yeah, there was actually an article, like to Chris's point, at the time that was like black community could solve this crime, Sleuth says, and one detective anonymously went on the record to the newspaper saying, they know who this is, they just want money. If we offered them money, they'd give him up in a minute.
Which did not happen, by the way.
No.
Well, again, if there is someone, no matter what community it is, there's someone that's in your community and they're murdering folks, usually the communities come together and eliminate that person.
Right, especially when it's girls and young women. You usually...
It's just human nature.
See,
You expel that person from your community because they make it unsafe.
By the way, there was an excessive amount of husbands killing their wives in this same fashion.
Yeah, and
at
there's
the time.
this is this is also what attributes to a lot of people thinking that it's multiple copycat murders or multiple murders that are now linked together, because there's a lot of men who, for some reason, are killing their wives.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Susan B. Anthony should have shut the fuck up. Sorry.
Wow.
And one man came home drunk from a prohibition was in effect at the time. So he comes home from the speakeasy and he tells his wife, we're going to play Jack the Ripper. And he just cuts her up. And she survived. But,
Again,
a couple of these women did survive.
women were still viewed as property, too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Once you were married,
That was
you
it.
can do whatever the fuck you want to her.
And if you weren't married and sleeping around, you kind of deserved what happened to you, which is essentially what was said by the pastor at the time.
It's just, it's a weird way to look back at history and how we valued human beings as a whole. Like, women were less than, black men were less than, black women were less than. And it's just like, they're just people, man. Like, what the fuck?
Yeah. Then I think it was in, 1914, Mary Fagan was murdered.
Oh, yeah.
She was a 13-year-old who went to pick up her check at a factory. She was waiting to get in school because schools at the time were overcrowded. So she had to wait for her slot to get into school. So she was working at a factory. She goes to pick up her paycheck, never comes back. She was owed $1.25. Well, they go to the factory, and she's found in the basement. She's been raped and murdered in similar fashion, throat slit, cut open. It was a very horrific crime scene. And so suddenly the news and everybody's focus shifts to Mary Fagan's murder. And we lose a lot of visibility of the Ripper murders, even though we know they didn't stop. Because the news might have the time like, grand jury indicts another, person on the Ripper murders because they're just arresting everybody.
Right. And they did
that hide your kids, hide your wife. Like, they're out here arresting everybody.
The crazy part was they arrested several men for these murders.
Some of them actually went to jail.
Yeah, some of them went to jail. One of them actually was beaten into a confession, but ended up getting acquitted because there was a confession clearly from being beaten by the police.
By a white jury, by the way. They were like, even they were like, this is fucked up.
A couple of them weren't even convicted. They're like, this was quite a stretch.
Yeah, they were just grabbing people off the street. They had this loose definition from Emmylou. What was her name?
I was going to talk about that.
I keep thinking Emmylou Harris, like the country singer.
It's Emmylou Sharp.
Emmylou. Like, she said, again, tall, black, flat-brimmed hat, broad shoulders. That's kind of what they had to go off. So they're just grabbing dudes off the street.
Right. There was one guy named Henry Huff who he had that designation as being like tall, broad shouldered, and he was covered in blood when he came home and all this different stuff.
He'd been in a bar fight.
The one that suspect that Emmylou did, and we say loosely identify, okay? She said to the best of her knowledge, this was the person.
She heard the voice and was like, "That's him."
His name was Todd Henderson, and they brought him in front of her. She said she didn't. To the best of her knowledge, he looked like her, but when he spoke, she started shrieking, which they attributed to her being like.
And he was very curiously near a lot of the crime scenes, and this is something almost unheard of. A lot of the crimes were committed in the exact same crime spots as before.
Yeah.
Like now, I think like it's standard protocol to watch because killers like to go back and revisit the scene of their crime, so to speak. This guy would not only revisit them, he would recommit the crime.
Well, and the fun part was, for this guy, like, it was a lot of circumstantial evidence. A lot of it was, like, he said he didn't own a razor, but the night of one of the killings, he went and got hit, or the day after a killing.
After he dropped it off to be sharpened.
He dropped it off to be sharpened.
And his wife, he said he didn't own a pocket knife. His wife was like, I borrowed his pocket knife last week. Just asked her a random question, and she confirmed. But he said, if I was a Rip Rat, I would have started with my wife. And he had cut her a couple of times. Like, he was very violent towards her. And they're like, well, that's kind of true. He was like, I would have started with that bitch-ass wife of mine.
But it may have been him not killing her, but killing her over and over
Over and over again in the form of other people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, but they never... I mean, at the time, though, when he was in custody, he and another man, I think his name was Henry Huff, similar thing, was the ballroom guy. Ballroom or pool room brawl guy. They were both in custody. The murders were still going. Like,
there was another one named like Daniel something or other that they picked
Brown.
up. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. The thing about Brown is
Henry Brown.
Henry Brown. He admitted to them. He was like, he didn't admit to all of them, but he admitted to a couple of them, and even talked about in detail about how he did it.
Yeah.
And he got off. I mean, that's
the guy who got beat for a confession.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there's not much you can do about it.
I don't know. He seemed a little suspicious to me.
Sussy baka.
He did.
I mean, it doesn't matter if you beat him into a confession. And again, looking at the time frame, how egregious did it have to be for a white jury to be like, that dude didn't do it?
Yeah, he did.
Like,
and he was acquitted.
What the fuck?
There was one guy, his name was Charles Owens. He was convicted of one of the murders, but they never named which one it was.
Right, and he did actually end up admitting that, I did it.
Yeah.
And they think it was his wife. Because remember, the time Mary Fagan happened, they stopped reporting, really. It was just blurbs at this point.
Yeah.
And there were so many of these murders that happened that were... The reporting on them was so shitty.
Yeah.
There's no way to tell how many are actually
They
attributed.
didn't even
how many
have
were
names sometimes.
Yes.
When they knew who the women were. So,
how many of these may have been, again, you don't know if it was another jealous wife that just stabbed somebody.
Yeah.
Because you were cheating with her husband. I mean, there's no way to tell because the reporting was so god-awful.
Well, and
one of them, she didn't... I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
One of them, she didn't have a name. They just said she was stabbed in the neck.
Yeah.
Well, that doesn't sound like the Ripper murders at all. That sounds like somebody got mad and stabbed somebody in the neck.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, like, a lot of these guys who are being attributed, which, like we said, these are considered unsolved. They're the one guy, Charles Owens, got convicted of one of them, but they don't attribute it to Atlanta Ripper. They just attribute it that he got, he
Right,
got
and a couple of
gotten.
guys were convicted of killing their wives,
Yeah.
but they're lumped in with the Ripper murders.
Right.
But completely different.
But like, I think in 1914, whoever it was, which at this point it could be copycats, it could be a bunch of different guys.
Could be the same guy.
Could be the same
There's,
guy.
Again, there's no way to tell because they don't report these well.
Right.
Yeah, he said like he actually started leaving notes in fireboxes around Atlanta saying like, I'm going to cut the throats of all the Negro women.
He would set the fire. He would turn off the firefighters would show up to steal the alarms, and there'd be a note there.
And signed the Atlanta Rippers. And this is about the time when 1914 is basically sort of the end, but this is when the crimes themselves are the most egregious because body parts are being taken. This is when you really do see very similar stuff to like the Jack the Ripper murders.
Cutting the hearts out of people.
Yeah. And I mean, it was egregious, but like we said, it may have stopped in 1914, but it's attributed to go from like what, 1924?
Up into the 1920s.
Yeah.
What if he got drafted?
Oh.
Interesting.
It's World War One.
That's why it stopped for a few years and then
Yeah.
happened after it. Interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's also this like running conspiracy theory that it is Jack the Ripper because the guy who they thought was Jack the Ripper did come to the United
Immigrated,
States.
Yeah, he took a boat to Savannah and came up to Atlanta.
The problem is, again, with Emma Lou getting stabbed and seeing him, and there's this theory at one point where they say that it may be a white guy dressed as a black guy. She would know the difference.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no way she didn't know the difference.
Yeah.
Again, I've seen, if you've ever seen a minstrel show, clearly white people dressed up like black people, not
Yeah.
what black people look like.
Well, and this was seen again that the tall black man with the black brimmed hat and the black shirt, he had attacked another lady, but she got away, ran to her husband and was like, there's a fucking man attacking me in this alley. He grabs his gun, goes down there. The dude is still fucking there.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking,
Same
why
as-
didn't you fucking shoot
Yeah,
him?
put it just.
Similar situation with another woman who like some guy was whistling at her like, hey, I want to come talk to you. She ran to her employer and her employer got like a gun or an object, went out after the guy. The guy was still standing there and he was like, the fuck you doing?
So they call the police. I'm like, just shoot him.
Just
Move on
fucking
with life.
He's
shoot him.
standing creepily in an alley, and sure, he didn't do anything, but still shoot him. Kneecap him. Like,
Yeah.
what? Just keep him there. Then there were three women, or 3 or 4 girls, actually. I hate to call them women because they're like 17 and 18.
Yeah,
like,
they're not
these
grown-ass
aren't
women.
women. They're walking by a field, and this guy starts whistling at them, dressed in exactly the same. Well, they scream so loud, like they hear them like half a mile away. They get away, and they're like, the fucking Ripper's out in the field. But they're like, we just arrested somebody. The police
It was-
just could not get the right man.
They could not get their shit
Well,
together.
they also weren't.
They weren't trying.
Yeah, they weren't organized. They weren't trying, and they honestly didn't believe they were looking for anybody specific.
Right.
A lot of them believed this was just black guy got angry, killed his wife.
Well, this is why the black community kept begging the mayor, please put black detectives on the force. Especially if you believe that black people won't talk to the white cops, put a black detective on the force.
Yeah.
To my knowledge, that never happened.
No, and the thing is, like we said, I mean, it's only the small time period it's attributed to, but we just don't know because there just wasn't good reporting. There wasn't good policing. I mean, at this point, they really were self-policing. I mean, the only reason why some of these women got away is because somebody had said, hey, there's an Atlanta Ripper, and they just so happened to see a weird dude. And
Yeah.
they're like, gotta go.
Or they got stabbed in the back and ran away.
Yeah.
That's like the one lady she never even saw him. He didn't hit her on the back of the head. He beat her face in so badly, like it wasn't even recognizable as a face.
Yeah.
And he stabbed her in the back, slit her throat, but she ended up making it to Grady. And then she says to the police right before she died, literally she died as she was saying it, I didn't see him. He hit me from behind but I'm pretty sure it's and stabbed me.
Yeah.
And this is the level of cowardice you're dealing with too. Like
Well, they thought he was also bashing him with either brick or a rock. And they weren't sure which.
And they found a rock in a field at one point, which was the only rock they found. But I think that was very convenient to find something you've never found before.
Circumstantial that there was never a focused investigation enough to find these women or find these killers or killer. And what ended up happening is now, I mean, even people who, I mean, I've lived here my entire life. I think we're all from here. None of us had heard about this until we were just happened to be dicking around at Oakland Cemetery and there was a book
in the
about
gift
it.
shop.
Yeah.
And think about, we're not talking about these were heinous crimes. Bashed in the head, throat slit, a lot of the times body cut open, things rearranged, taken out. Like these
Shoes
were
stolen for some reason.
Yeah.
Yeah, don't fucking touch my Jordans. No.
Dude, expensive.
And
My
I look at it
Skechers.
like it may have only been 5. He may have only killed like 5 of them, and the rest were just
Copycat.
just coincidental copycats.
people that were pissed off at their wives. and-
Yeah.
Which we did see a lot lot of that.
yeah, it's just the craziest
Copycat
thing
murders.
because there's no way to.
And Jack the Ripper was the latest, like, sensational
Yeah.
thing. Like, wow, this guy did what?
Well, and I mean, like I said, history repeats itself in the Atlanta child murders. There's a lot of murders that were not similar to,
Yeah.
or there were a few that weren't even similar to what the modus for
And you had
the
the same
motive
thing,
was for
it's the black community.
Wayne Williams. Yeah.
It's black.
They're still in Atlanta.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's
what
fine.
it is.
But there are 3. So we've talked about 2 of the main theories about, who the murderers could have been. Was it a single one? Was it multiple people? Like, things were pinning on. But the third one, and this one I really...
Please don't say cow. Please
It's
don't
not
say
a
a
cow.
cow rolled down a hill and murdered these women.
No, the cow just... He accidentally...
Eat more chicken.
Which, by the way, I need to
Chick-fil-A.
I need to correct myself. It wasn't a scythe that was through his chest. He was cut with a scythe in his neck, and then he was pitchforked. That was what happened.
Oh, yeah.
Just in case
That
anybody
makes
says
sense. Like, he
anything.
goes up in the air and things fall down. That's exactly how it happens.
Anyways, what's your third theory? Don't make eye contact with Chris.
It's not my theory, but I do like this theory. So, at the time we had little Mary Fagan killed in the factory, and I think the guy's name was Henry Connolly, was the black janitor who was found covered in blood and said he had helped the factory owner dispose of her body. And the factory owner's like, we didn't do any of this.
Oh, this was Leo Frank. We talked
Leo
a little
Frank.
bit about this when we talked about May Haley Lancaster.
Oh, Leah Frank. Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
But what was the janitor's name? Henry Connolly, I think. So, little Mary Fagan's killed. He says, yeah, I helped him dispose body. That's why I'm covered in blood. And sure, we cut her throat and cut her open just like the Jack the Ripper, but...
Did we?
Yeah, and that's what Lee Frank's like, we didn't do anything.
Who the
And-
fuck is this we we're talking about?
Yeah, so his name's Jim Connolly, and it was... A lot of people believed that he was truly the Ripper because, get this, he lived right at the epicenter of all the murders.
Really?
He was seen at almost all of the scenes people could place him there. The black community came forward and said, we think this is your guy.
Yeah.
So he's definitely the one in the similar cases. And there's a theory that it was Jim Conley who had, assisted with disposing of Mary Fagan's body because, one thing is that how do you just assist with that and not report it? Like, you're just going to help somebody she's 13.
Yeah.
And killed exactly in the Ripper style. And he lived in and around the area. He knew some of the women who had gotten killed. He was known to be this violent guy with these weird...
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about it, and, Leo Frank, he ended up being convicted and acquitted. I just can't remember off the top of my head.
Well, I'm not focusing on the white guy.
No, what I'm saying is, but it was like the one time they focused more so on the black guy's testimony.
Right, the fact that he gave testimony, and now you read about these Ripper murders, and you're like, huh. This is very unusual that now, like, the abounding theory is that he's the one who was the Atlanta Ripper. Or, like, they're still, like, think that there's multiple people, but he is the serial killer, Atlanta Ripper.
He's the one that did
Yeah.
the majority of the
Yeah.
ones that should be attributed to him.
Right.
Exactly. Either that
would
or
be-
maybe he helped the guy do a lot more murders than Mary Fagan.
That's pretty aggressive to
yeah,
help your boss start murdering bitches.
Yeah.
exactly. That's why I'm thinking, I don't know if Frank
That'd be a
really...
tough sell. Like, how much of a raise am I getting for
Yeah.
this? 'Cause
Yeah,
I'm not a doctor.
and we know that Frank was creepy. Like, he flirted with the little 13-year-old. He touched her a lot.
And again, this is the
And
early
maybe
1900s.
he raped her and left her for Frank, Connolly, who did whatever he wanted to her.
See,
I
even
don't
that
know.
one's hard for me to, like...
Mm-hmm.
Because then you're kind of working together, and at least you understand, like, at that point, Leo Franks would understand what Connolly was going to do.
Yeah.
You can't keep people like that around.
No.
Like, if you know he's murdering folks,
He's
you
going to
just
murder
don't
you at some
hang
point.
out with him.
Yeah.
So, like, and even then, like, even the hitting on the 13, 14-year-old girls is weird now,
But at the time, they were
Back
getting married
then,
at that
yeah,
age.
like-
Yeah.
Eh.
They're like, she showed up to get her paycheck, and he'd pat her on the back, and I'm like, oh, stop.
Yeah, but again, she was working.
Yeah.
She had a full-time job at 13.
At 13 years old, right. $1.25 was pretty big back in the day.
And I don't know. I try to look at things historically, and whereas now we want him thrown in jail, back then, by the time she's 15, she's probably married and
Yeah.
And has a
having
kid
kids.
already. Yeah.
Like,
I mean, that's how they had so many kids. They started really young.
Yeah.
We're talking like, you start your period, boom, you
Yeah, you didn't
marry
really
age.
have a quote unquote period. You just were pregnant until you couldn't.
yeah. But I just wonder about that. Like, again, we look at now, like, the cops should have done a better job. There's no way.
Yeah.
They probably were not prepared or trained or
So to say,
even...
they're probably ill-equipped for what's happening.
Yeah.
This isn't
Well, and it said they
2023
had
forensics.
a really small department.
And
they-
they're not even in the right mindset. Like, they're not even mentally prepared to do this job
No.
properly because they've been trained their whole life that community is just violent. So it's not even like they're focusing on it the way they
Right.
need to because they're just so conditioned to think black violence exists. It's just that's what that community is. As long as it stays over there, we don't care. And that's kind of how they looked at it, which it sucks. But I don't know. I can't really blame them for not knowing any better because they were taught and conditioned not to. So it's tough.
Yeah.
So like we would want, like now you just want your cops to do their job.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if it's black, white, Asian,
They shouldn't
man,
see
woman,
color.
child. Who cares?
Yeah.
What happened? ABC. But back then it wasn't that.
Yeah. The priorities were very different.
Yeah. And again, it was their whole upbringing was very, very different.
Well, and I think it's important to like spotlight these kind of things because what we see is something so similar to what we saw with Jack the Ripper, but nobody talks about it. Like it's almost uncannily similar to Jack the Ripper with more. I think there was more murders in this one than there was.
Jack the Ripper was only 7.
Well, it was
Yeah.
like 7, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, if you're talking about like the average, which was 20 for this one, but history's forgotten it. It's been relegated into a dark
because
corner of
Jack
Atlanta.
the Ripper killed white women.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
he was probably a white guy.
Yeah.
Yep.
Again, it was white crime. And especially, I'm not even going to say that. It was in London. The 1800s, there weren't a lot of
Yeah.
ethnically different people
True.
in
Yeah.
London.
But you also don't really
All
see
crime was
people
white
kill
crime.
outside of their race like that.
Yeah.
Usually serial killers will target
Stay
their
within, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Which is
alrighty.
weird to me.
Yeah, well, I mean,
It's-
they talked about it with the Atlanta child murders when the FBI did the
Mm-hmm.
forensics. It's like generally serial killers just stay within their race,
Yeah.
but
It's
it's go ahead.
It's because what you grow up with and you're comfortable with
Yeah.
and you know
That's what
their
I'm saying.
habits and how they operate.
And you also
Yeah.
develop a hatred for what you know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's fear of what you don't know, but hatred of what you do.
I'm like, if I ever flip my lid, who would I would kill people in traffic.
Eskimos.
Okay.
Fuck them.
That's also a racist word.
Oh, excuse me, Inuit. Native
Yeah.
peoples. Also, there are Eskimos that don't consider Eskimo a racist term. They're like, yeah, been
Yeah.
Eskimo my whole life. It's like,
Yeah. I
But
wonder
what-
how it got to be such a bad word.
I
like,
think
what
they started
did Eskimo
attributing
mean?
all Native Americans north of the border as
To
Eskimos.
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 Yeah, like,
But what would you do for a Klondike bar?
Well, I wouldn't murder young mulatto and octoroon women.
yeah,
Oh God.
only the quadroons.
Only the quads.
They're the dirty ones.
Yeah.
Alrighty, well, hope you enjoyed this really I mean, I think it was a very interesting episode, especially because it's so different than
Yeah.
what people know. Hey, we could cover John Bonet every day, but that's been covered how many times? Okay.
Also, Angie can't mention octoroons in that story, which she
Exactly.
loves for some reason.
Well, I was about to say,
No.
I would also like to tell everybody we're so proud that aliens did not get mentioned or Nibiru. So we are good to go.
But
Please-
you just did.
I mean, I wanted to say it's been 0
And
and
days.
I didn't even mention the cows.
In the context of the
This
podcast.
yeah, in the context of the podcast, it didn't come up.
Although, you know, a lot
Don't
of them
just
were
turn-
killed in and around
Can
fields.
you just turn the episode
No,
off,
no, no, we're gonna
please?
talk about it.
No.
I'm not saying that a cow didn't make eye contact with the guy and be like, hey.
Why do I picture a cow with
You got
like
a knife?
a ski mask on, like creeping with a knife?
Like in its hoof.
He's not a cat burglar, cow burglar. Alrighty.
I don't
Also,
think burglars tend to kill. I said burglars.
Burglars. Angie
All right,
claimed to be a
G.
quadroon for a while, and turned out she's a liar.
I know.
Oh yeah, that's true. Any
Yeah.
hoozles.
Whitey.
Hey, hope you guys have a great day. Thanks.
We love you.
Bye.
Make sure to pay your taxes.
Quadroon still sounds racist.